Hey folks, knife review time. This is the Kershaw Cryo model 1555 Ti. It is an excellent knife and a tremendous value. If you're looking at this, don't even hesitate, just go out and buy one. But let's go ahead and just jump right into some of the specs. This will run you about 30 bucks most places online, maybe as much as $35, $36. MSRP is $49.95, but you're not going to pay that anywhere, so try and find your best deal and jump on it. But anywhere within that range, $30 to $40, and I highly recommend this knife. It is made in China, so if you have any issues with that, you might want to look elsewhere. But for those of you willing to look past its country of origin, you will find a great knife. This was designed by Hinderer. I'll zoom out here, and then I'll bring it up closer to the camera to show you some of the details. And you can just see as we're backed out there a little bit, if you've seen any of Hinderer's custom designed knives, you'll notice that this one is, it kind of has that Hinderer vibe. It's got some of his characteristic details, the shape of the handle, the shape of the blade. It just all kind of evokes Hinderer's design philosophies. And it's even got a lock bar stabilizer, like on his XM18 and XM24. So it's, oh man, there's always a cat coming in for a view. No, you can't lay down here, lady. Move on. Okay. I know one of you mentioned that you always look forward to seeing my cats show up in my videos. They leave me alone all day. I make a review, they get right on camera, so there's not much I can do about it. That was Gray Baby, by the way. She says hi, everyone. But again, it's a Hinderer design, and it's very similar to a lot of his custom knives. So if you like those designs, you'll probably find this one very appealing as well. There aren't really any other variations besides this standard model. It just comes in a plain edge. It is an assisted opener. Sometimes I forget to mention that on some of these guys. But there is a Cryo 2 coming out late 2012. So by the end of this year, if you're watching this in 2012, there is a larger version of this knife. It's going to have a longer blade and a longer handle. But otherwise the construction is going to be almost identical. It's just sort of an exploded version of this knife, and that'll be the Cryo 2, and again, that's coming late 2012. And don't expect that to cost too much more. So if you want a larger knife with the same design, that's probably going to be your best choice. But if you can't wait, don't worry about it. Just grab this one and enjoy it till that one comes out. I bought this from Amazon. I paid 32 bucks myself, and that was including shipping. And I think for that price, it really is. I know I've said it already, but it really is excellent. And I've owned it for a month now, and I've been carrying it almost every day for my EDC. It did leave my pocket a few times, especially just recently because I received a new cold steel American Lawman, so I switched it up for that. But for the better part of a month, this is what I've been carrying. Blade length on this one is 2 3/4 inches, so a little bit smaller blade than I typically am used to, but the design was so appealing that I just had to try it despite that, and it's still a very effective blade despite it being a little bit shorter than the knives I'm accustomed to. Overall length 6.5 inches, and when closed you're looking at 3 3/4 inches. The weight, according to Kershaw, is 4 ounces. On my scale I get 4.1 ounces, so they're probably right. At least those two are close enough to be accurate, so right around 4 ounces. Blade steel, if you didn't see it earlier, let me get a little close up there, is 8CR13 MOV. An excellent Chinese steel. In my experience, this is about on par with AUS 8, pretty similar in its performance. And then you'll notice that the knife has this dark coating on it, and this is a titanium carbo-nitride coating, which I am not very familiar with. This is my first knife to include it. And you can see on the blade that there is some wear. When I hit it with the light, you can see where it's kind of rubbed away. But you have to take into account that I have used this knife extensively over the course of the last 30 days, and the coating has held up very well. So I'll give them that. A lot of companies' coatings, those Teflon coatings that we see on a lot of knives, come off pretty quickly. Some hold up better than others. This one's one of the better ones. I think you can also kind of catch in the light there, there's a little bit of a scratch in the handle, and not a big deal. Still an excellent performer, and I'm not too worried about the coating coming off a whole lot. I was extra aggressive with this knife on purpose to see how that coating was going to hold up, and it kind of clanked around in my pocket with a few things, with a flashlight, and I was not at all delicate with the blade. I really went at it whenever I was cutting something. I was very aggressive, and I think that for how much I've used it, the coating has held up very well, so I want to give it high marks there for sure. And also relating to the coating, as far as rust, I've seen none. Not on the blade edge and not anywhere within the coating, so on that front it's been holding up pretty well. Interestingly enough, and I'll go ahead and I'll show some comparisons right now since I'm going to talk about it. My SOG Twitch 2, you probably aren't going to see it, maybe you can, has started to develop a little bit of rust on the blade, and there's a little bit on the handle, and that's kind of disappointing. I'm not really sure when that showed up. I looked at it today and saw it, and I'm usually pretty careful about adding a real light coating oil. Maybe I forgot, but considering that it's been pretty humid lately, and this has been in my pocket at work, and a lot of times my EDC knife doesn't come with me to work. I have a different knife that I carry regularly at work. So I purposely carried this to work often in order to test it out there and really put it through its paces. And despite getting sweat from me on it, and occasionally being a little bit damp, the humidity in the atmosphere, none of that seems to have affected it negatively in any way. There hasn't been any rust, so that's been really nice. So let's do some quick comparisons so you can see how this fits, when compared to some other common knives that some folks out there may already own. There is the SOG Twitch 2. There is a Spyderco Tenacious, Kershaw's own Skyline, and then we'll move the Twitch 2 down here, and we'll add in another of Kershaw's very popular assisted openers, the Leak. And what's funny is when you see them side by side, or if you see them in each hand, the Cryo actually looks like a larger blade, and it does have a wider handle and a wider blade profile, but in fact the Leak is longer, so it looks like a larger blade, and it actually feels more substantial as well. If you want something slim and sleek, you're going to want to go for something like the Ken Onion Leak, but if you want something a little bit more heavy duty, and this knife is definitely a hard use heavy duty knife in my experience, then the Cryo is going to be the way to go. So there's a few different sizes. Just for the heck of it, there's your medium-size Victorinox Swiss Army knife. Kind of give you some idea of how that's going to be if you've got one of those, kicking around somewhere that you could make a visual comparison to. And then let me move these fellas out of the way, and we'll continue on. There we go. Okay. The blade shape, as you can see, is a drop point. Very effective. It does have a swedge at the top of the blade there, at the spine. It pierces very well, and it is hollow ground on the blade. So it slices very well. It's quite thin at the edge despite being reasonably thick in stock, towards the spine. But as you get towards that edge, it's a very fine and narrow bevel. The handle material is stainless steel. I'm not really sure what kind. I think it's 410 stainless steel, and it also has that same titanium carbo-nitride coating, and the rust resistance seems to be identical to the blade as far as I can tell. Construction is torque screws. We have several size T6 holding the handle together. There's 2 on each side, and then we also have 2 of the T6 for the pocket clip, and then 1 for the lock bar stabilizer, and then we have 1 T8 right at the pivot there. It is not skeletonized, so if you look in there, you can see that it's just that same thickness of steel all the way across. Of course, on the business half of the handle, there is the torsion bar for the assisted opening feature recessed within that handle, so it's milled out a little bit in order to fit that in that side. But other than that, obviously there's no holes to lighten it, and it hasn't been drilled out on the inside of the handles in order to cut down on weight. And at 4 ounces, not very heavy, very similar to the Spyderco Tenacious. It feels like a handful though. When you carry it, it's got some bulk, it's got some heft to it, but I rather like that. And it's substantial. It feels like a larger knife despite its diminutive size, and I think that's also pretty cool. It is an open back design, as you can see. We are looking at a frame lock, of course, and it does have these cool little black pillars along the back there. and then that last pillar also acts as the lanyard hole. It is a large lanyard hole, and it will fit a 550 paracord just fine without any issues. You won't have to smash it through there or drag it through with anything. It'll fit all on its own. It does not have any sort of texturing, but that coating is quite grippy. It actually grabs your hands very well, whether they're wet or dry. And I've noticed the blade has the same tendency, and so one of the things that, it was not a big issue, but one of the things worth mentioning is that that coating does seem to kind of grab onto certain materials, and as I cut through wood for a little bit of whittling, I noticed that it seemed to want to kind of grab onto the material and not slice through, you know, as quickly as maybe it would if it had a Teflon coating or if it had no coating at all. So it's just interesting. It's not really, you know, I wouldn't really read into it much beyond that, but it is something to note in case you were curious. We do have some jimping. I know folks love their jimping. Not a big deal for me, and this one isn't too aggressive, so it doesn't really get in the way, which is nice for me. We do have a little bit at the back of the handle, which meets at the base of the spine of the blade, and then there's some inside the handle there. So I suppose it's right where you'd want it to be, and it does hold your thumb in place quite well. I tend to reach beyond the jimping and put my thumb farther up on the blade if I'm doing some finer cutting work. Like when I'm cutting lath at work, if I have to scrape away mistakes that I've written on a survey lath, I'll move up here and cut that way rather than farther back on the handle. But it is effective. You know, it like I said, it'll keep your digit right where it is if you press against it, you know, with enough force. As far as overall design and comfort, like I mentioned earlier, I love the design, and the handle comfort is excellent despite its size. Again, this is a small size knife for me. I can just get my pinky on the handle there, as you see, without it slipping off. Very comfortable, even with the pocket clip being in my hand. As I have it, I switched it to tip up. It does come from the factory tip down. It's extremely comfortable, and I have no issues with it whatsoever. I'm not really used to doing some of these, you know, I see fellas making videos and showing the reverse grip and some such, and you know, it seems comfortable. I don't know why you'd have to hold a knife in that position for a long time, but there's no hot spots in any configuration. So another huge plus for this knife. Very comfortable, at least for me. Pocket clip positions, 4-way positionable, so left-handed folks and right-handed folks will find some way of setting the clip that's going to work for them, regardless of which pocket you're putting that in. That's always great to see, because not every manufacturer does it, and I think not even Kershaw does it on all their knives. So that's a huge plus, and I really like to see that on pretty much any knife. You know, it might bring down the looks a little bit for some folks, but I'm a fan. You know, give me more options. Even if I'm not left-handed, you know, I have friends that are, and it would be nice for them to be able to clip the knife however they like as well. The pocket clip is very strong, and from the factory, it was almost too aggressive as far as how much it wanted to grab. The tension here was very extreme. I actually took it off, and with 2 pairs of pliers, actually 2 pairs of Leatherman multi-tools, I bent the clip ever so slightly to kind of give it a little bit more bias away from the frame of the knife. And it's still really tight, but it's a little bit easier for me to get it in and out of my pocket. And that is a deep carry clip. You can see it's a fold-over design. When in the tip-down position, it's pretty much almost invisible. You'll just see the clip, and if you're looking straight down over it, you know, you'll see the spine of the knife. But when you switch to tip up, you can see that about a ½ inch of the knife sticks out of your pocket. For me, not a big deal. I don't care really about concealed knives, so I don't mind it. But if you do want to have it completely concealed in your pocket, you will be relying on that tip-down position. Overall balance is excellent. It feels a little bit handle heavy, which is to be expected. Obviously, we've got more steel back in the frame than we do at the blade, and we're not looking at any G10 or thin liners or anything. So it tends to lean back towards the handle, but it feels right. It feels just right for this blade, and it really makes you feel like you've got a decent amount of handle to grab onto. Again, that weight just comes into play to where it's just perfect. I don't know how to explain it. It's a really good feeling knife, and that weight and the balance lends itself to that vibe of having a really good grip and a really good purchase on it in your hand. The opening mechanism is a flipper. That's the main way most folks are going to open it. Now, it does have dual thumb studs, and these actually don't act as blade stops. They are just independent thumb studs, but I know some of you have said that you use the thumb studs or you don't have any issue with it. For me, it really, I don't know. It doesn't hurt per se, but it's just not my preferred way of doing it. So there's so much tension on that torsion bar inside to keep it, closed in the handle, that I really have to put a lot of force, and it feels a little bit, you can see right there, it didn't launch all the way because I was putting too much, pressure against the blade. It just feels a little bit unsafe. So that's not my preferred method, and I just stick with the easy flipper, which works. I mean, either way, if you get used to the thumb studs, it'll work well for you. The flipper works fantastic for me. And of course, as we mentioned, it is an assistant opener, and you do have the torsion bar inside. The pivot smoothness is excellent. It was a little bit stiff when I first got it, but I flipped it like twice, and it's totally smooth now. I haven't had any issues getting it to flip out since. I did play with the pivot a little bit, adjusting it back and forth, backing the screw in and out and trying to see how loose I could have it and still have it flip, or rather I should say how tight I could have it and still have it flip and kind of center the blade. And, it was just me kind of goofing around with it, but the pivot smoothness from the factory is excellent. I put a little bit more oil than they sent from the factory, and it flips open like a dream. So no troubles there whatsoever. Blade centering, since I just mentioned it, is pretty good. It's not completely perfect, but this is a frame lock, and I tend to notice that with this design that the blade sort of leans away from the lock, as the lock is putting a little bit of pressure on one side of the blade. This is one of those things that some people have a real problem with that I do not. As long as the blade is not scraping the liner or the inside of the frame, I don't care. It can be a little bit leaned. It might not look perfect, it might not look beautiful, but it doesn't really bug me at all in the slightest. But mine was not perfectly centered, so for those of you that might be worried about some such things, keep that in mind. Okay, I'm starting to lose my train of thought here. Lock safety, I think, is excellent. I don't have any fears that the blade is going to close on me. Let me back it out again. I'm getting zoom happy here on the old camera. Lockup, as you can see there, if I can get it to focus, I'm kind of losing the light of the day there, is at about 50%, maybe a little bit more. Again, this is something that a lot of people talk about that in my experience has never really been a factor. I have knives that had their lockup more than 50%. I've used them for years, and they're in the exact same position. So I'm not completely convinced that that's something that's going to be a problem over time. But that is the lockup on mine. And I have every bit of trust and confidence in this lock. I really like frame locks. They're not my favorite type of lock, but I really do like them. It's a solid design. The blade's not going anywhere. There's no wobble, there's no play or wiggle in any direction, just completely solid. Again, like with any knife, if I really crank on the blade back and forth, side to side, I can introduce a tiny bit of play, but I don't think that's what most folks are saying when they complain that there's a little bit of wobble in the blade. You won't really find that here. No rattling parts, there's not really a lot going on. The torsion bar inside doesn't make any sound when it's open or closed, so it's not a noisy knife in that sense. Overall strength is excellent. The blade is thick, the handle is thick, it's got good weight. The pivot and the lock all seem very well designed, all well fitted, and I think it's a knife that's just going to last years, decades even. I mean, this knife is going to take a beating and keep coming back as long as you treat it well. Keep it clean, oil the pivot, and keep it sharp. This thing is really going to stand up to a lot of abuse. So that is exciting to say. I really think that Kershaw has an excellent design with the Cryos. The blade design is great. Like I said, I've cut with it, and other than the coating being a little bit grabby or grippy, I've had no issues cutting through all sorts of material, all the usual everyday stuff. I've cut through wood, cardboard, plastic, packaging, tape, all the usual stuff, and it cuts everything just fine. I don't see any problems with its cutting ability, and I don't think you will either. The factory edge was quite sharp, not the sharpest I've ever seen, but it's pretty close to on par with Kershaw's usual high standard of sharpness. It was able to cut through paper just fine when I got it, and it would shave hair with aplomb. So excellent factory sharpness. Edge bevel symmetry, very similar in how they were ground from the factory, and they made it a really nice and even edge at the tip, which isn't going to come out here, but trust me when I say that they are very similar from one side to the other. Very nice for a knife in this price range. It cuts expertly. It holds an edge about as well as 8CR13 MOV usually does, so if you have a knife of that steel already, if you like it, you'll like this one. If you're not fond of that steel, this one's not going to change your mind about it. It will wear faster than some of the better higher end steels like your S30V, CTS XHP, D2, that type of stuff, but it also is going to sharpen a lot faster, so you've got that trade-off. And for me, for an everyday knife, I think the 8CR13 MOV is a fine steel and will suit most people perfectly. Don't worry too much about it if you're not very well versed in all of the different steels. Just know that this one's going to be a good choice. I love the looks of the knife, like I mentioned. The fit and finish is very good for the price, and I'd say it's just on par with the Spyderco Tenacious. So for those of you familiar with that one, and what you can expect from Spyderco's Chinese manufacturing for their $30 to $40 knife, this one's about the same. And I'll say that it is, I'd say it's above average. I think it's very, very nicely done. There's not any burring. There isn't any scratches in the finish when it came from the factory. Everything seems to be nicely ground, as I mentioned. All the coating, the paint on the black screws, the finish on everything was just very well done, very even from one side of the frame to the other. So I've been really happy with all of the fit and finish. This is a long review. Let's give a quick rundown of some of my pros and cons on this knife, and then I'm going to try and wrap this video up for you. Thank you for hanging in this far. Okay, for my pros, I'll say that it is an absolutely rock solid build at an amazing price. It's a wonderful looking design. It carries well, it cuts comfortably, it's a slim design, it's got decent grip even though it doesn't have any texturing. It's very fast opening with the assisted opening function. For those of you that are fans, you're going to love how quickly and how pronounced this one is when it opens. Four-way clip is always great so that lefties and righties can clip the knife any way they want. It cuts well, it's very rust resistant in my experience, and it has a huge and perfectly sized lanyard hole for those of us who like 550 paracord. Now onto my cons, and there aren't very many. Again, I'm not a big fan of assisted openers. I would have liked to have seen this in a non-assisted design. I've gone online and I see some folks are modifying their Kershaw Cryo to remove the assisted opening feature. There's a little element to the blade and handle construction that can be altered to make the blade stay in the handle a little bit better, but I just, from the factory, I would have liked to have seen a non-assisted design in this knife, and maybe we'll see a non-assisted Rick Hinderer design similar to this one in the future. That would be really nice. It's a little bit more grabby than maybe it would have been if it had like a Teflon coating, or maybe if it was completely uncoated. It tends to bind up but just a little bit, and it's not really anything to really worry about. The pocket clip was extremely tight from the factory, and I did have to alter that myself. So that was something that it's minor, but I did want to mention it, as not really to knock the knife, but that pocket clip did need a little bit of adjustment, and it is worth mentioning. And I'm not completely convinced of the usefulness of the lock bar stabilizer. Now, I know a lot of people like this, and I hear I know precisely what it's for. It's to keep you from overextending the lock bar past that little piece so that you're not bending or tweaking or fatiguing the metal in any way. I have never done that on any frame lock knife, and I imagine it's an issue for some people, but it's never been one for me, and I'm just not convinced it's necessary. And maybe if they hadn't put it there, it might make it a little bit easier to open the lock to close the blade. It's not that it's difficult to do, but I don't know, it's just it's something I'm thinking about. I don't see a lot of usefulness in it. If you like it, you'll love this one. If not, it's just there. It's not really going to bug you too much. No big deal. I have used it for work, home, like I said, cutting cardboard, whittling, regular everyday tasks, and I think that's what it's designed for. It has sort of a tactical leaning. It's kind of skewed towards a tactical design, but the size and the materials, you could use it in that role, but for me, it really is, considering its size, I think it's really geared towards being an EDC blade, and at that, it very much excels. My opinion of Kershaw overall is very high. If you watch my warranty video in which I received this knife, you know that I have nothing but good things to say about Kershaw's customer service and their warranty department, and their attentiveness towards their customers is just head and shoulders above any other manufacturer I've ever had to deal with. Similar knives with similar performance, of course, would include Kershaw's own Leek and I think this knife pretty much stands alone. I think it's a great value. It's similar in price to a lot of other knives that are, you know, a similar value, like the Spyderco Tenacious and some others, but I really think it stands alone in its own class. It's a great knife. Emphatically, I recommend it. If you don't own one and the design is interesting to you, just don't even hesitate. Just buy it, check it out, and you'll find that you're going to really like it as well. Okay, so this has been a long review. I'm sorry if you heard any noise in the background. It's hot, it's still summer, and it's quite warm here, so I've got the fan running, I've got a window open, two things that I don't normally do when I'm making a review, so it might be a little bit noisy, and for that I apologize, and also sorry about the few interruptions there have been as I edit this video together, but this video is a little bit longer than I was expecting, and I ran into a few snags here and there. So thanks for hanging in there to the end. I hope you found this review informative, and I hope it helps you in your decision on whether or not to purchase or try the Kershaw Cryo. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll bring you some more reviews. I hope very much to be talking to you really soon. Thanks again. Bye.